When I was about 14 years old, amongst many other ridiculous things, I went on a trip to Kauai with my parents. That was not the ridiculous thing. The ridiculous thing was that young Jonathan at 14 was convinced that he was on some kind of a great spiritual quest and that there were answers scattered all over the world, and all I needed to do was trust my intuition, gather them in my basket, put them together eventually, and the puzzle would be complete, and I would have all the answers I could possibly want and more. Well, it's been going pretty well. But there was a missing piece in my puzzle. And it just hit me recently. And I want to share what that is because I think it's a piece that might be important for you, and I'm absolutely convinced it's important for the future and well-being of our planet. But those years ago in Kauai, when we arrived to what I think was a Sheraton hotel on the West Coast, I remember that my parents went to look after the check-in, and I went to the hotel concierge, where I asked the gentleman seated at the desk, 14 years old, if there was anywhere I could go and study traditional Hawaiian spirituality. To which he sort of pushed back from the desk and looked at me long as if to say, "Really?" And then he excused himself. And I thought I had done something wrong. And moments later, he came back from around the corner and kind of pointed like this. And a large Hawaiian woman with her glasses perched at the end of her nose, looking like a great owl, she floated over to me and said, "Are you the one?" And for a 14-year-old on a great spiritual quest, the answer to that is, I am the one, right? Yes, I am the one you're looking for. So she took me for a walk out on the driveway, which made everything feel a little more special and weird. And she started to talk to me about my journey and what I'd been studying and what I was learning and what I was looking for. And to make a long story short, and it's a really good long story, but time is of the essence, she said, "Well, meet me tomorrow. I'll be in the guest library making leis." And the next morning, there I was at 10 a.m., and something like an unexpected tutelage began. And for 10 days, this woman named Hea guided me through experiences and teachings and exercises that opened me to aspects of the world that I had only yet imagined. Feeling energy in things, seeing energy in things, connecting with spirit and spirits, and even, if you could imagine, changing the weather. But that wasn't the exciting one. The exciting one was just a couple of days before I left, where she had me on my last grand adventure go to a piece of private property. Now you have to wonder what's going on with my parents at this point, because there they are in the rental car dropping me off from the private property, where I am supposed to walk along the edge of the jungle by the beach, and then I would find a trail, and you'll know it when you see it, like literally that kind of stuff. And in I went to the jungle and sensed what I was supposed to sense and felt what I was supposed to feel and all that kind of stuff, but eventually came to a dead end. And she said, "You will arrive at a place, and you will know that place when you arrive." I know, it's like, I'm not making this up. This is really what it was like. People put this in movies and books, but you can't make this up. So there I was. It was a great rock wall. And she said, when you get there, pray. And at first I started praying, inviting spirits, inviting God, inviting lessons. And the longer I stood there alone in this jungle, far from anyone or anything, before cell phones, I started to pray for my safety and my health, and then no one was going to come out and kill me. And all of a sudden, that's when I heard this great sound. Boom. Boom. Like a drum, like the earth itself had become a drum, and I felt the vibration rush through my body. And this journey of spirit was becoming real. It was materializing. It kept going. Until all of a sudden, I looked up and I noticed that there was a great tree that was blowing in the wind just close enough to the great rock wall that when it came back, it would hit the cliff and shake down to the roots. And I thought, no magic here. It's just a tree blowing against a rock wall, and it's shaking down to the roots. And as I looked down to the roots, I noticed something like a little opening in the rock wall. And that's when I knew I had to go in. And of course, my first thought, being a spiritual seeker, was, oh shit. Because it's easy to tell these stories and sound courageous and brave, and here I went and did these things with those people. I did not want to go into that little crevice, but it seemed the only place to go, the only thing to do, and everything else this woman had taught me had somehow come to a greater experience. And so down on my knees, and in I went. And I followed the prayers that she gave me. And as I moved in, of course, I closed my eyes in terror and then opened them again as I adjusted to the darkness. And I realized that actually there was light coming from inside this cave, this tunnel, not tall enough to stand in. And so I continued on my hands and knees until I came out into an opening. And as I stood up, what I saw was something absolutely unforgettable. And it was a great circle, an enclosure of high cliffs, at least 50 feet high, maybe more, with very little in the center except one great tree, an extraordinary tree. The kind with branches that reach forever and drop down tendrils. It was magnificent. And in that moment, I felt like I was seeing something more than what I was seeing. Do you know that kind of feeling? Like, oh, this is an important moment. Take note. We all have those moments. It felt mythical. And as I walked around that tree, I continued the practices that I was being taught, sensing, feeling, not overthinking. And I imagined things, I imagined that this was the tree of life, right? That so many traditions talk about. I saw a small overhang in the rock wall. And for a moment, I imagined a large group of people huddled under that overhang in tattered clothing. And just the impact of that, the visceral feeling of it, and I began to weep, to cry. There was so much sadness in that picture. And then I went and I sat under the tree for a while and saw the beautiful sky above and the birds circling around. And I thought to myself, I will never forget this place. But that's just the beginning of the story. Of course, I went back, I saw Hea, it was my last day. I told her all the things that happened along the trail. I told her about the thundering tree. I told her about the tunnel. And I told her about the cave or the enclosure that I came to. And she smiled, this great knowing smile. And she said, that won't be the last time you see that. And you might be interested to know that those people you saw are still there. Still there? I don't know what you're talking about. You mean the people I imagined? Those are the spirits of our ancestors who hundreds of years ago went through that same tunnel and lived in that enclosure while Captain Cook and his men invaded the island, searching for natives, conquering culture, and taking the land as theirs. And they lived there. People were born there. People died there. That is a sacred place to us. Now, is that interesting? I think, to me, that was pretty good. But there's more. See, there's a book right there, Angela. I want that book. While I was in Hawaii, Kauai specifically, I also happened to hear by some, who knows, weird synchronicity or magical word of mouth, that there was an author named Serge Kahil King who wrote one of the first sort of modern shamanic practice books, sort of white guy goes native thing. And I heard that he was speaking at a bookstore, and maybe I should go check him out. Maybe even Hea sent me there. I don't know. And I hitchhiked there. Again, I don't know what my parents were drinking, but apparently a lot. And it wasn't close. It turned out it was on the east side of the island. I even remember it was a beige Corolla that picked me up. And I went to this, talk, and it was very interesting, yada, yada. I met Serge King. He asked me if I had a book to sign, and when he found out I had no money and wasn't buying any books, he's like, well, good luck, kid. Next, moved on. No, I'm teasing, wherever you are, Serge King. You should buy my book. No. So anyway, but while I kind of floated around in the back trying to figure out what to do, I ran into a young Native American woman from Michigan. And her name, so she said, was Smokey Rain. And as I told Smokey my crazy story, she said, oh, well, there's a book you must read. And she gave me this book, this actual book. This is the book, Black Elk Speaks. She went and bought it for me that day in that bookstore. And I started to read this book, was devouring it voraciously, and continuing my adventures with Hea, the feeling, the sensing, and so on. Now, we're getting on the plane. We're sitting on the runway in Kauai. I have now just had this wild experience of this great encircled enclosure, the magnificent tree at the center. And I was burning through this book as we waited on the runway. And suddenly I was coming upon Black Elk's vision in the book Black Elk Speaks. And he describes a sacred hoop with a flowering tree of life at the center. And so, of course, I read on, barely breathing. And I came to this passage, which I just read again today for probably the first time since then. And he says this. Now remember, earlier in the book, he talks about a vision as a young man seeing the sacred hoop of life, the circle of life, and in it a flowering tree. And that this somehow represents all humanity, all people, all beings. But this is how the book ends. Today I send a voice for a people in despair. To the center of the world you have taken me and showed the goodness and the beauty and the strangeness of the green earth, the only mother, and there the spirit shapes of things as they should be. You have shown me and I have seen. At the center of this sacred hoop, you have said that I should make the tree to bloom. And with tears running, O great Spirit, my grandfather, with running tears, I must say now that this tree has never bloomed. A pitiful old man, you see me here, and I have fallen away, and I have done nothing. Here at the center of the world where you took me when I was young and taught me, here, old, I stand, and the tree is withered. Grandfather, my grandfather. Again, and maybe the last time on this earth, I recall the great vision you sent me. It may be that some little root of the sacred tree still lives. Grandfather, nourish it. Nourish it then, that it may leaf and bloom and fill with singing birds. Hear me, not for myself, but for my people. I am old. Hear me, that they may once more go back into the sacred hoop and find the good red road, the shielding tree. And as the plane took off, I cried and I cried. And I felt like my spine had become connected to the earth there. And that as the plane left, my spine stayed rooted, and I could feel the pull of the energy, like my insides were being ripped out. And some of you know what that feels like, because that's what it feels like when you leave someone you love, when you leave your home, when you leave your family, when you feel like you're losing your truest self. Let's fast forward a little bit. It's true, eventually I became what you might call a Sundancer, adopted member of a Lakota community. And the Sundance itself happens in a sacred hoop with a tree at the center. And that was a life-changing experience, something I did for 8 or 9 years. But that was not the fulfillment of that experience in that cave, nor the story. Until something interesting happened recently. I was preparing for a talk about the wisdom of Indigenous people. I got into a conversation with a therapist about this idea that I wanted to share about what I call wireless wisdom, that Indigenous people not only cultivated and shared their tradition once upon a time in a pre-technological age, a pre-electronic age, but most Indigenous teachers to this day insist that for greatest power, for greatest effect, all spiritual practices must be done free of technology, free of electricity for that matter. Now think about that. Think about your life. And the reasons for this are many, depending where you go, whether it's Africa or South America or here in North America. Electricity affecting subtle energy, electricity affecting consciousness, technology being unpleasant for spirits. There were all kinds of explanations and reasons. And he said, well, that's interesting because it reminds me of a story of a client I just had. A boy about 11 years old has been seeing me for some months now. And his parents have been distressed because he seems to be falling into a hopeless despair. He's not performing at school. His behavior is erratic. He's grumpy, anxious, and they're trying everything. Doctors, school support programs. And they came to this psychologist because the doctor was recommending medication for all the attention problems and so on. The psychologist said, well, what if we talk first about lifestyle and see what we could modify there? Tell me a little more about your son. What's he eating? What's he drinking? What does he consume and how? What does he consume? What do you consume and how? Oh, like, does he listen to the radio? Does he watch TV? What about movies? What about video games? To make a long story short, what they discovered was that sometime after their divorce, two single parents struggling to manage work and having kids, they had both unknowingly amplified the amount of screen time they were giving their son. And it seemed that he was perhaps on a tablet or a device or in front of a TV many hours a day. And he said, well, let's just start there. Let's bring it down to 1 hour a day, and let's see what changes. And of course, the parents were despairing, because how could this make that big a difference? And what will we do without a babysitter? How will he entertain himself? And they told the therapist that the first week was a nightmare. Arguments, anger. In the second week, the mother called the therapist crying and said, my son is back. Sorry. My son is back. What did you do? And so he and I started to talk about the research that is coming out about the effects of our enmeshment with technology and our dependence on constant digital stimulation and babysitting. And I'm not talking about kids. In 2011, there was a study done in the United States that showed in 2011, more than 50% of all 8-year-olds had their own personal entertainment device. An iPod, or an iPad, I should say, a tablet, an Xbox. The same year, the statistics on self-reported anxiety in this country went from very recently and previously 30% to over 60%. Over 60% of Americans were self-diagnosing with depression and anxiety. Over 60%. And although we are a rare group of people, I would guess that would be many of us in this room. And what they have discovered without conjecture is that the entertainment, the distraction, and the problem solving that we rely on from technology is changing our brains. The limbic system, which is our fight or flight reactive system, is activated, and the frontal lobe, the cerebral cortex, deactivated. What does that really mean? It means we become fixated, impatient, and needing more. More friends on Facebook, more texts from friends, more answers from emails, and it doesn't matter our age, it doesn't matter our work. And what are we losing? Because in the frontal lobe is our capacity to strategize, to plan, to weigh out options, to think, how would I like to respond to this situation, not how do I feel like responding to this situation. And how many people in the last year have talked about how life feels more and more out of balance, how society feels more and more out of balance. And the irony is, as we try to understand it better, most of us are turning to our devices more and more to check the news, to check the weather, to check what other people think about the news. And each time we get the answer we want or the screen we want, there's a little release of dopamine. And we feel better. And so we check it again and again and again. As adults, this is concerning. But when you see me cry, move to tears, it's because it is literally destroying the minds of our children. Because when you don't know how to spend time in your frontal lobe, it means you can't handle waiting. You can't handle boredom. You can't handle disappointment. You can't handle delay. And I don't know about you, but that's pretty much life on earth. And all of a sudden, it clicked. It clicked. I was starting to think, wait a second, what's the answer? Because it's not to get rid of technology. I love technology. I mean, most of you know me. iPhone, iPad, iPod, iBook, iMac, and sometimes all of it going at once. I love it. It's awesome. It's amazing that I can stay in touch with my mom at the click of a button in Canada, and I see her, and we're talking and showing her the baby. It's amazing. My wife, we can see her family in Spain. I mean, technology is phenomenal. But as we allow artificial intelligence and technological distraction to infiltrate our lives, the problem is not what's coming in, it's what's going out. What are we losing? Time in nature? Time together? The thing that finally clicked was the antidote. The antidote to this crisis is simply to ask the question, what does it mean to be truly human? Truly, fully human? What aspects of being me cannot be repeated, replaced, or replicated by a machine? And guess what? If you just do more of that, you will be healthier, you will be happier, you will live longer, and you will be more resilient along the way, period. I'd love to sell you a book. I'd love you to come to a workshop. But it's that simple. In any moment of your life, facing any distress or concern, you ask yourself the question, what aspect of me can technology not replicate? Do more of that. That's it. That's the code. And that has been in us all along. And as we come to a close, let me share what I see as the mending of the hoop. For what is truly the tree that stands at the center of the wheel of life? It's us. Each human stands at the center of creation. And each one of us, a living tree. Look, do you see it? Now imagine my nervous system. Just my nervous system. This brain and a spine, like a tree. At the bottom, in the feet, we find all the nerve endings, right? Reflexology works. Why? Because the whole body is represented in the feet like a root system. And the brain, though compact, if unfolded, is this huge network of communication and capillaries, right? We are the tree of life. We are the tree of life. It lives inside us. And this new relationship with the brain and the heart and the soul is the mending of that hoop. And if you allow your life to unconsciously be consumed by distractions so that you don't have to feel uncomfortable or face your truth or accept the wholeness of who you are, then you will stand at the center of that hoop like black elk and mourn the withering of the tree. But I believe this to be absolutely true. That if we, each in our own lives and in our society, can look around and say, I will nourish those aspects of myself and my world that are unmechanizable, that cannot be replaced by technology, that transcend the material, then I will give birth to a new world. And we will have the resilience to adapt to technology, to embrace technology, and to live in harmony with all life. So it's not too late. Let's close our eyes and conclude. And I'm just going to ask you to think for a moment, what are 3 wonderful aspects of being you that cannot be put on a tablet, recorded, turned into an algorithm? Is it laughter? Is it relationships? Is it touch? Is it intuition? Is it dream work? What will AI never do? Just think of 3 things. And what would it take for you to invigorate them, to invest in them, to nourish them? And revitalize the tree of life yet again.